to. And I want to actually talk about something about bringing business, engineering, and design together. And I think it was quite nice for Alan Kay to talk about the aesthetics in relation to engineering. And I think that's something that we're seeing now, the increasing element of aesthetics. I love the Thomas Edison example, beginning with the light bulb. And I just wanted to kind of give my take on that, because at the time, the light bulb was something that was functional and cheap, and it lasted a long time. And that was very much the experience of light. And now I think we've moved to the experience of lighting. It's the experience that allows us to buy these wonderful Danish pieces of design and have them in our houses or in our offices, because it's the experience of light and the feeling of light that is just as important as the functional. The functional doesn't disappear, but there is an added level of the experience, and that's what I'd like to talk about. And this is very much related to the intersection of business and experience, because I think the basic bottom line is that where there is competition, and at the moment we talk about hyper competition, that there is competition for everything. Where there is competition, we choose the experientially preferential solution. And that can even be choosing a Ryanair flight. We have several. But that Ryanair flight is a kind of trade-off of experience, cost, and it's all down to the experience. The Wall Street Journal has said, customer experience is the key competitive differentiator in the digital age. And I have a huge collection of statistics of kind of these figures that are becoming more and more recognizable and visible in business and marketing. Here's another one. 86% of business leaders agree that customer experience is vital for success. So it's a success criteria. 89% of companies compete primarily on the basis of customer experience. So it's a competitive arena. And there's also an element of relationship in it. In the lifetime value of a satisfied BMW customer is estimated to be $143,500. I'm not sure where the 500 comes from, but this is old data, and it's probably around $170,000 today. So there's a motivation because we know that if you have a good experience, you'll come back because you'd like that experience again. And that creates a relationship, so relationship is quite important. And this is also true in the newer theories of marketing. There's a core theory now, which is gaining a lot of traction, called service dominant logic. And one of the core tenets of service dominant logic is value in service is experientially determined by the beneficiary. That's service dominant logic. Vargo and Lush, if you want to look it up, there's a very interesting take on service. They actually say, just to make it difficult to pronounce, value in service is phenomenologically determined by the beneficiary, but basically they mean experience. So on the one hand, we have a huge amount of argumentation saying that experience is the driving force in. On the other hand, we have strategy, long-term approaches, strategy and tactics to creating an improved advantage. And it makes sense for me to bring these two things, and that's what I want to talk about, the experience-centric organization. The mic seems to be dropping out a bit. Should I change mic, or is it okay? Let's keep going, try it. I just want to show this. This is an electrical car from not that long ago. I'm not sure of the exact date, but this is an electrical car. And one thing you could say about it is it's not a particularly desirable car. I mean, would anybody say this is a desirable car? It's kind of childish in its form. It's designed, the details are designed, but it just doesn't look desirable. And it was a kind of car for people who might have had a bad conscience about the environment, and maybe a second car for families, but it wasn't really gaining traction. And this is how electrical cars looked until this came along. And I think this is a fantastic example of a desirable experience. And if you dig down a little bit into Tesla, the strategy they had for this car was three-pronged. And this created a huge change in the market, and I think was fantastic in actually changing our perceptions of electrical cars. But they had three prongs in their strategy for Tesla. The first was any electrical car should be better than a petrol car. The second was any electrical car should be faster than a petrol car. And the third was any electrical car should be more fun. So it's better, faster, fun. And I think that's summed up in this and the ecosystem that they built around it to enable it. It was better, faster, and fun. And it made the other electrical cars look quite primitive in response. And it became a desirable thing to have, not only because it was better, faster, and fun, but it also gave you some kind of idealistic credibility in the market. And they keep moving on, and they keep shocking us in a positive way with the experiential aspect. I just love this car. I'd love one of these, and I'm waiting for them to come to Denmark, the Cybertruck, because it's a really bold move in relation to trucks that have kept pretty much the same form factor from like a 150 from the 50s. They're really taking a radical direction and making themselves noticeable, and they're differentiating through experience. Now, I'd like to just step back a little bit and just say a little bit about the nuance of the experience, because I generally get the feeling that we have a fairly primitive relation to experience, of experiences being good or bad, and I'd like to nuance that a little bit more because it's a complex mix of things that I'll show you. I'm going back to 1997. This is a very young Joe Pine, very great guy, very friendly guy, and I've talked to him quite a lot. He wrote a book called The Experience Economy, and the core part of the book was basically, the takeaway was, why do people spend 35, 40 krona for a coffee at Starbucks when you can actually buy coffee beans, make your own coffee for a much lower price, or go to a cheaper cafe and buy coffee? The whole point was, why do people spend so much? And that's because of the experience. And Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, said, we're not in the coffee business, we're in the experience business. The whole thing about Starbucks was giving an experience. And that's right back to around the year 2000, right? 95, 2000. Today, Joe Pine, I think, would probably use the example of something like Noma. How many of you have been to Noma? How many of you are lucky things? Oh, there's a few hands going up. But the question is, like, why do we spend several thousand krona on a meal? It's partly for the functional element of our bellies filled. It's also very much the experiential event. It's the happening of Noma. And that's a huge experience that it could be interesting to unpack, because it's a mix of several things, which I'll come back to. But the key of the experience economy is that we've moved from function to emotion. This is an advert for washing powder for Omo. You probably all know Omo. It's a brand in Denmark and across the world. But the whole argument of the advert, apart from the fact there was a lot to read, but the argument is very functional. This is an Omo packet for a few years ago I photographed in a supermarket. And the interesting thing to show about it, it says nothing functional on the package. It doesn't actually say it's a washing powder, right? It says dirt is good. Now, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the advert that went with it, because there's a little picture of a boy here playing football, and he's quite muddy. But the image, the advert that went with it was quite interesting to kind of analyze, because it starts with a couple in a kitchen, a kind of Danish design kitchen, quite minimalist, and they're looking romantically into each other's eyes, and you can see that they're quite content. And then the camera pans out through the window, out to the garden where there are some kids playing football in the mud, and they're splashing mud, and they're getting really dirty, and they're having a great time. Now, the interesting takeaway, if you kind of deconstruct that advert, is that it's saying that you can let your kids go out and play in the mud because Omo will sort it out for you, right? Omo will take care of it. So Omo is basically a service. It's not a product so much, it's a service. You can relax and it takes care of it. But the underlying message as well is that you can be happy parents using Omo. In fact, your relationship can be a lot better if you use OMO. So there's an emotional underlying message there that OMO will actually make you better parents. So I have huge boxes of these at home. And seeing if it helps, I'm not sure if it helps. How many of you remember the Just Do It Nike period? How many bought these and paid about 300 kroner to advertise the Nike logo? Yeah. It's quite an interesting phenomenon because why did we do it? At the time, it was made sense, and we kind of aligned ourselves with the message that Nike had about winning, about success, about being bold, perhaps. But this was something that we do, and we still do to a lesser amount, but this is part of the experience. We felt the experience, and we shared an experience by using these clothes. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced this, but this is buying a phone at the Apple store on the launch day. I just want you to look at the look on this guy's face. It's religious exaltation. We've been looking at what our group experience is, and there's this term called collective effervescence when a whole group comes together, because it's more than the addition of the individual parts. You see it at football matches, you see it at religious ceremonies, we see it where lots of people get together. And Apple harnessed this ritualistic sacred behavior. But he's totally in some kind of unique experience that he'll never forget. And just imagine what it would be like going to Elgiganten, the kind of electrical store in Denmark, buying a washing machine, and as you wheel it out, everybody cheers and high-fives you. That would be a very bizarre thing. But Apple managed to make this a success. And it became a big thing. People camped out for nights, and it was big news. It was very desirable to have this experience. And a kind of, yay, I've just spent 12,000 kroner on a little piece of glass and metal and silicon. I find this fascinating to explore and understand, because these are experiences that someone has designed to happen. This is another one I think quite fantastic, of like standing in front of a celebrity and turning your back on them. This is Hillary Clinton, and the message here is that it's great to experience being with Hillary Clinton, but it's more important to actually show that I was there. It's the me being more important, and the social being more important than the actual experiencing it. If you wanted to experience it more, you'd probably turn around and look at it, but the whole point is to turn your back so that you're in the photograph. I think it's a fantastic example of how things have changed. So we're moving a long way from functional. We're moving to functional plus functional to make experiential. This is an advert for a car. But if I ask someone maybe who doesn't have a technological or modern, or they might think it's a car because there's no signal that this is a car. You have to understand it. And basically, there's nothing functional about this message. It just says, you want me, right? It says, you want this car. And it doesn't say how many wheels it has, how many doors. It doesn't say anything about it. It's just, you'll want this car. And
we'll change the mic.
I think we need to change the mic, just a sec. Keep falling out. So the point here is that the functional is just assumed. We assume a washing powder washes our clothes white. We assume that a car travels from A to B in a reliable way, which means that the competition is more on the experiential and the emotional. And it's moved a little bit further from not just having assumptions about the functionality and the emotional experience. It moves to something about the idealistic. And this is a move that Nike moved into, which was quite provocative at the time, with showing Kaepernick, who had taken the knee and had been frozen out, and he was very much pointing out Black Lives Matter and equality in many ways, and Nike decided to use that. And it caused a huge disturbance in America, especially because of the president who was there at the time, and many people said they were going to burn their Nike sneakers, and they expected the share price to fall. But what actually happened was the share price increased by 3 to 4% and sales increased because it was a message that resonated with culture at the time. There was a lot of underlying need to associate with this. And this experiential outside, it even has come to here, which I think is a great location for this, but I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's worth reading up, but there are huge environmental credentials for the place that they're holding this conference, so I think it's really nice that I can be a part of that, and it improves the experience for me when I read about it. But the uniforms, they're made from upcycled and recycled uniforms from the laundry company. The lamps that are here, they're all being sourced from second-hand shops, so they're reused. The wall here is a set of recycled equipment. A lot of the cups, this cup here, in fact, and the popcorn packaging, they all can be composted, not just recycled, but they can be composted. So the idealistic element is something we're also becoming part of the experience that we have, and we expect organizations to behave in a particular way. And this, all of these things, they're all about designing for experience. They're all about experience. It's all about where aesthetics meets the engineering, meets the business. And that's what I'd like to talk about. And it's more of a detailed, nuanced thing than just good or bad, or good smiley, bad smiley. We need to be a little bit more in detail. And as far as I've kind of got in my research, the innovation element in the experiential sphere is a mix of many things. I'm not saying this is a perfect mix, because the mix is unique to every service or every product. But the functional, of course it has to be there. But we kind of take that for given. So we're moving more over to the other aspects, such as it has to be usable. The more digital it becomes, the more we have to focus on how easy it is to use, how easy it is to get access to these things. But it has to be emotional. It has to appeal to our emotions. Alan Kay was talking about this kind of primitive brain that we have, but it's very emotionally driven. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. It has to be social. It has to be part of a social network, because that's a core part of ourselves and our being. And it has to have a degree of idealism. It has to fit with the ideals that people have. Otherwise, people will probably choose something else. And it has to support our own creation of self, our self-identity. The reason why we buy a Tesla as opposed to something else, or we buy an Audi, or the clothes we wear, whether we buy Adidas or whether we buy Nike, it's not just a functional thing these days. It says something about us, and something we want to say about us. And this is important. This is important because it drives our decisions. It drives all of our decisions. And we might think that we're rational human beings, but even in public service, they admit that we're not. This is an article from Politiken, the Danish newspaper, talking about the death of the rational human being, admitted by the government that a lot of their policies were based on the fact that we make decisions about what would be economically best for us. And they found out, basically from Kahneman and others, that we make decisions that are not necessarily for our best. And this has an implication for policy, because policy was based on the rational human being. So they said, rest in peace, rational human being. And this is important for policy and public service. And I love this quote. I've been reading a lot by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who has this great book called How Emotions Are Made. I really recommend it if someone wants to dive deep into modern neuropsychology about understanding how we're experiencing things. And let me just say, I'll read it out because it's quite a nice quote. She's researched this all her life, and she comes to this conclusion. I have lost count of the number of experiments published over the past 50 years showing that people are not rational actors. You might believe that you are a rational creature, weighing the pros and cons before deciding how to act, but the structure of your cortex makes this an implausible fiction. Affect is in the driving seat, and rationality is its passenger. It doesn't matter whether you're choosing between 2 snacks, 2 job offers, 2 investments, or 2 heart surgeons. Your everyday decisions are driven by a loudmouth, mostly deaf scientist that views the world through affect-colored glasses. I just love that bit at the end. mostly deaf scientist, a loudmouth, mostly deaf scientist that views the world through effect-colored glasses. I think that's what my students would probably describe me as being. But it's very interesting that this is how we are, and it's kind of time to actually take account of this and use it in the systems that we're developing. And it even relates to business to business. I think this is a fantastic ship. It's made by Ulstein, the shipbuilders in Norway. And we've been working with Ulstein. And when I was talking to the CEO, Tore Ulstein, he says, when they're bidding for ship projects, he says, pretty much all of the bidders have the same functional requirements. The price varies a bit, but it doesn't vary a lot. But what really makes us differentiate ourselves from others, we invite the company over, we take them to one of these ships, we take them on board because he knows every project group working on this, there are one or two captains, and he says the feeling that the captains get when they stand on the bridge here, the experience of that makes it totally desirable. And we know when something is desirable, you use and expend energy to get it. So that's how their policy is. That's very experiential to design. And we're working a lot with future bridge concepts, future boat concepts, together with them on the detailed interactions to actually make almost a stepwise change in the future bridge based on emotion and experience. But of course, function and usability are key in safety concerns, but it all goes together. So we're talking a lot about what makes things desirable. And this quote here, the minute they set eyes on it, they feel something that you might not be able to define. It's something, for our context, something that your heart and souls identify with, is something you want to be a part of. And I hope you all have experienced this, because that's how we are as human beings, desiring something. For my daughter, it was these pair of Beats, and even though I was trying to be the rational father, saying there are cheaper ones that sound just as good, she was like determined to have these, and she spent a whole year saving up her pocket money to buy these. So she had no headphones for a year, but she just wanted these, and that was something for her. I'm just looking at time. How long have I got left? 15? Yep, great. Okay. I just want to take a little kind of, give you a little mini task, a little break now between part 1 and part 2. I just want you to turn around and talk to the person sitting next to you if they're close enough, or maybe shout if they're a little bit further apart, and just talk about something that you find, a product or a service or something that you find desirable. So just talk amongst yourselves now, admit your guilty secrets, or maybe not so guilty secrets, but just say something that you've either just bought, or would like to, or have subscribed to. Okay, I'll stop you there. I think it was just interesting to hear the buzz and see the emotional things. Does anybody want to kind of put their hand up and admit what their guilty pleasure was, or what their other person's guilty pleasure was? Shout them out, yeah? BMW. Why?
A driving machine. I have a friend who's an auto journalist who recommends me to use the same money to buy a Ford. I'll get much more value for my money and more driving experience. But I don't want that. I want a BMW.
Fantastic. It's all about the experience, right? Yeah. Anybody else? A robot vacuum cleaner. And would you like to say why a robot vacuum cleaner?
It looks like someone else does my job.
Yes.
It's ideal.
I think the experiential aspect is really cool, because I know people who have the robot vacuum cleaners, and they're just really, sometimes they just stand and watch it, and because it's such a pleasure. And my actually admission I have, which is in the book I've written about, when I was a kid, I grew up from a kind of working class family, and when I was about 10, we bought our first automatic washing machine, which is a machine that just washed the whole thing. And before that, there'd been washing day at home, where there was steam and everything at home. And we all, it's really embarrassing to admit it, but we all actually put chairs in front of the washing machine and watched it wash the first cycle. It was the first family entertainment that we had. And we just fascinated by the fact that various things happened by themselves, and it spanned. So I think things like that, the experiential value of that was enormous at the time. And that's because the alternative It was a very old-fashioned washing machine. Okay, I won't ask more. I want to move on. But I want to say, okay, if we accept this, that the experience is one of the main decision makers in our lives. It's actually the thing that's driving us. And rationality is in the passenger seat. What should we do about it as an organization? So going back to this, customer experience is the key competitive differentiator in the digital age. It makes sense to me. This is a blue ocean area. Surprisingly, even since the experience economy was written in 97, a lot of companies feel a little bit awkward moving into this area. So there's huge potential. It's still a blue ocean. Startups kind of grasp it straight away. But legacy organizations, they're actually a bit slow to adopt to this. But if this is something that we agree, the earlier things that I've said, then not only do we need to put purpose at the core of strategy, we need that purpose to be the experience. And that's not just the customer experience, but it's the employee experience, because that gives the customer experience. So I just want to talk a little bit through the steps. I've worked with huge companies like Adidas and Lufthansa on experience strategies. I've worked with Scandinavian companies like Gjensidige Insurance, banking in Norway, Telenor, kind of international organization. I've been around all of the Telenor business units discussing this and teaching this. And we've found, or we've researched, we've developed some steps that kind of fit. They're not chronological steps at the moment. They're just elements. And the first thing, if you want to focus on experience, you need to start with the experience. And that sounds quite easy. And this quote from Steve Jobs from way back still is relevant. But actually, how do we do that? You've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology and not the other way around. And at the moment, I feel a lot of organizations are still using a bit of a kind of toothpaste tube model of developing systems where the experience is part of it, but it's not the key part. And sometimes, like with toothpaste, you get a little bit, or you get nothing, or you get everything, right? It's a little bit unpredictable. And I think we need to move away from that and start and use what we'd call an experience pull approach. Start with the experience and work backwards. The second thing is we need to be honest about ambition and position, because we all want to create extraordinary experiences, because they're the experiences that people remember. But there's always an association. The first thing I get is that, does that mean everything has to be like Disney? Because there's no doubt Disney is an extraordinary experience, but it's an entertainment experience. And we've got to be aware that not everything can be an entertainment experience. The last thing I'd like, if I go to post a package at the post office, is someone to be dressed up like Mickey Mouse, singing a song as they put the package in the box. That would just kill me, I think, if they did that, right? So there's a whole span of experiences. There's a whole span from the extraordinary experience to what I call the extraordinary ordinary experience. Almost like the feeling of having a really good tool in your hand when you're working on a car or working in the home. Just like this perfect extraordinary experience. And this is where I think PostNord should aim, where everything works really well. And it doesn't have to be entertaining. And it's pleasurable because everything works. And the surprising thing is, there's not many organizations who are actually can achieve that successfully and consistently. But there's a whole scale here. And it's a matter of being honest about your ambition and about where you can place yourself on that line, and in your strategy, where you can move to, where you want to move to. Or maybe just stay where you are, but be more precise about it. And to do that, you have to develop a terminology and be able to use it. And I find that the higher up in the organization you go, the poorer the terminology about experience. It becomes good. We want to have a good experience. Or we don't want to give a bad experience. And actually defining what experience is the right experience is a really interesting task and is worthwhile doing. And finding that and creating almost like an experiential target in your company. This is something that I think has been said 1,000 times, and is a kind of old one, but it's still important because I noticed that companies don't actually do it so much, and that's integrate deep customer empathy. Not quantitative, simple statistics, but deep empathy, really understanding people. And we have a mantra for that, which we say, see the customer, hear the customer, be the customer. And it's surprising how many organizations don't do that. Firstly, observation is the muscle. Observe customers, and you'll learn so much from their body language, what they say, how they do things, how they use things online, timing, movements, all these kinds of things are really important to just observe and reflect on them. And the second is hear the customer. Talk, but mostly listen and understand what customers say. There's a great quote attributed to Henry Ford. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. I'm not actually sure that's true, but it's a kind of quote that's used a lot. If I asked people what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse, as a kind of argument that you can't ask people what they want. But if you analyze that and understand, maybe the word faster kind of stands out in that term, right? Faster. Ignore the horse, faster. And be the customer. Use your own services, use your competitive services. We do something, it's quite common, called a service safari. We take top management through an organization to use their own services and get the experience, and they come back super enthused about things that can be made better. They're a little bit scared actually at the beginning of going and doing it. They come back with enthusiasm. Next, find your mix. Find your mix because it's unique to your organization. I'll come a bit more to that, but it's unique to the service you're providing. And find your mix and discuss it and use it in your projects. Because not all projects are full-on functional, usable, emotional, social, idealistic, self-promoting. It's not possible. Find the mix. Some things you might tone down. And it's important to understand the characteristics of your project. We're like, okay, here we need to really focus on the social. Or here we need to do something idealistic, culturally based, because there's some expectation in the market from people around us that we do something. This is another one you've probably heard before, but focus on the journey that the customer has as they go through the service. I won't go through the detail, but we have a before we use something, the during and the after, and that can be a cyclist that's a whole lifetime if it's bank or insurance. And we meet many touch points along the way. Each time we meet a touch point, we get part of the experience. And the summary experience, the remembered experience, is the sum of all of these things. But how often do we actually go through and identify each of the steps and put experiential words on these? I'm doing a masterclass on Friday. We're going to go through some of this, plus some of the other tools I'm talking about, to actually help how do we use this as a lever to actually improve our services. So we need to talk about the experiential journey. You need to define a personality, because we know that our expectations now of organizations are that they have a personality. So we have the experience on one end, and the experience comes from form and layout, typical design aspects. We have the different touch points. We have the tone of voice, the consistency or inconsistency of tone of voice, how we're spoken to. We have behaviors of the interactions, their behaviors, but the behaviors of people in the system. And we have the journey, the timeline. All of these things reflect and express the offering, the service offering, the value proposition, but also the personality. And we have an expectation that services and organizations have a personality and how they behave. And you have to match that. And that is based back on the brand DNA, the DNA of the organization. So you can work from the experience backwards. If you're a startup, and say what experience we want and how the other things should fit and what should the brand DNA be. Or if you're a legacy organization, you can start with the DNA and say, this is our DNA and this is what it allows us, but we need to adopt a personality. And we have a methodology for that we call brandslation, translating brand into experience. We need to sweat the big things and the detail. This is a Danish insurance company that I'm a big fan of because my kids are big fans of it, and they showed me it and I thought, oh, that's really cool. That's because I've worked with insurance and I keep getting the message, insurance can't be emotional. They've made insurance incredibly emotional. It's aimed at young people. They have created a great offering. So the big thing is quite interesting. It's travel insurance that you is automatically enabled when you leave the country using your phone, and it's turned off when you come back, and you just pay for the time you're abroad, and you say where you're going and what you're doing, so the level of coverage is automatically set for you. great offering because I think it's like this geo-based insurance. I think is a great future for it. But they have gone down into the detail of the tone of voice, even these really corny holiday. Unsuccessful holiday photographs. I don't know where they've got them from or whether they've made them, but these unsuccessful holiday photographs that they're using to kind of show situations that might happen. And this is that tone of voice. I really love it because in Danish it says "Det bor en lille skvadermikkel eller ulykkesfugl i oss alle." I think that's a really nice tone of voice. And the fact that they translate it, it basically means, let's face it, shit happens to us all. But the whole thing is very inclusive. It's like, it's not your fault, it happens to everybody. You're part of this and we'll take care of you. So there's kind of benevolence in it. Together with like a photograph like this, with this insurance, if you injure someone or if you damage their goods, we'll pay up. And it's just an image again, one of these kind of typical images that you might have grabbed at some time in your life where you've been at a party and fallen over or been at a concert or something like that. It's something that I think really works. It's through the whole organization and it's sorted out. Experience is viewed through the customer's eyes. I'm running out of time. 2 minutes. Okay, I'll rapidly go through. So it's viewed through the customer's eyes, so you actually have to understand things see things through the customer's eyes. I think I'll finish on this one because this is one I wanted to explain, is that it relates to the whole organization. It's not something one person or one small group can work with. It's the whole organization. I'll explain why. If these are users having an experience, that experience comes to the touch points. Either your own touch points that you own and control, or other touch points, including tone of voice, social media, things like that. But all of those touch points have a supportive technology behind them that allows that. So if you innovate a touch point, you have to work and innovate in the supportive technology, and they're based on platforms, backstage and routines. So if you change a touch point, you change the supportive technology, you change the backstage. I could talk a lot more about that. But then you're changing the organization in terms of hierarchies, formal, informal parts of the organization. You're talking about KPIs. You're changing basically everything. So this relates to the whole organization. The experience is not just one person thing, which is really cool because it means that we're all designers. Watson, this was no accident, it was done by design. I love this quote from Conan Doyle. But by design means by intention, because everyone here is an experienced designer. We all have a role to play in this to make it a success. You need to plan your maturity model because it goes stepwise. I won't go through the detail, but there are steps that organizations go through, from seeing experience as being a superficial thing to being core. So experience is gold. It's gold for customers. It's gold for people experiencing it. It's gold for the organization because it creates value. But it's also a gold standard that you need to keep yourself up to. It needs to be a core part of your strategy. The steps are known, so it's not unknown. You can make great strides through a sprint, but you also need to be looking out for a marathon because it's an organizational transformation. So, thank you. Masterclass Friday. The book, The Experience-Centric Organization, is here at the bookseller, apparently. And please vote, comment, discuss this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon.